It was a dark and ominous night, as nights often are when there's a child lying awake late in bed. And while the terrible monster living in this house is used to boys being easy prey, tonight there will be no such thing. For you see, Jeremy is a boy with a plan. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and begin this story from where it's supposed to begin. From the beginning. Jeremy shares the attic with Jason, the eldest sibling, his brothers, the twins, and his sister Holly. This, in and of itself, would not be strange at all, save for the fact that the four of them are zombies, the living dead, come back from the grave after having been devoured by the evil yellow monster. The first to fall prey to the fiend was Jason. Jeremy was very little when it happened, but he still remembers the gnashing of the monster's jaws, Holly's cries, and the day after when his brother came back, one of the living dead. The twins nearly escaped their fate, but at the last minute were thwarted by the monster's most surprising accomplice, Mom. For some reason, unbeknownst to Jeremy, Mom had a sick interest in feeding her offspring to the yellow monster in exchange for docile and submissive zombies. Of course, why someone would want docile and submissive children is something Jeremy cannot quite grasp. Every morning, Dad reads the newspaper, drinks a cup of coffee, and eats a slice of toast. Anyone who reads the news every day is pretty well informed about the affairs of the world. Unfortunately for Dad, the things that happen at home do not appear in newspapers. The last to go was poor Holly. Without any allies, 3 zombie brothers, and a baby brother too small to be of any help, she surrendered herself willingly to her fate and bravely marched toward the unforgiving jaws of the beast. Unlike his sister, Jeremy was not lacking in allies, although, to be completely fair, he was keeping with some pretty bad company. Vilgosh, a goblin, used to live in the tree out front, long before Jeremy's family built their home. However, since he liked the warm room, the cozy bed, the milk, and the cookies much more than the cold and uncomfortable tree hole, he decided to share the room with Jeremy and his siblings. Or more accurately, he allowed them to share a room with him. After all, there are far worse things than sharing a room with zombies. Their friendship, though weird, is at least convenient. Jeremy hates the dreadful gruel his mother prepares for dinner, like bat wings and ant brain sauce. Vilgosh thinks that bat wings are a real treat, and ant brains, although they tend to stick to his fangs, are by far his favorite sauce. Vilgosh loves his new life. Goblins collect objects that are useless to other inhabitants of a house, and oh, did Jeremy's siblings possess their share of unnecessary things. After all, what good are 2 identical socks to anyone? But Vilgosh knows that if the yellow monster were to eat Jeremy, there would be no warm, cozy bed, no milk and no cookies, nor anyone to make up stories for Mom every time some pretty little sock disappeared. It was decided then and there the yellow monster must not eat Jeremy. As we mentioned earlier, Jeremy was a boy with a plan. He knew to keep an eye out for his undead siblings, for although zombies are rather stupid, they are in fact quite proficient in the brain-eating department. He knew to resist his mother's vain pretense at love, since, of course, the real purpose behind the whole charade was to transform Jeremy into a zombie. But most important of all, he had to run away before the coming of the yellow monster. During the last few weeks, the zombies had grown more restless, and Vilgosh knew that could only mean one thing. If his calculations were correct, and a goblin's calculations always are, by sunrise tomorrow, the monster's breakfast menu would consist of Jeremy, with a side order of hash browns, bacon, and a small cup of OJ. For one could accuse Mom of being an accomplice to murder, but never of being a bad host to a fiendish monster. If Jeremy were to escape undeath, he had to escape tonight. Surely a couple of years living as a fugitive would be sufficient for Mom to forget this whole dreadful business with the yellow monster. Naturally, the whole running away bit is somewhat harder than it looks. Jeremy has to cross a hallway full of hungry zombies, head down the stairs that Mom installed specifically, complete with loose floorboards, to warn her of any escape attempts, run through the main hallway past the kitchen where Mom would be preparing the seasoning for the monster's feast, and reach the main door undetected. A little-known fact is that whenever humans build a house, goblins build a series of secret tunnels to go with it. Of course, thought Vilgosh, if one were to reveal a secret, it wouldn't be a secret anymore now, would it? As far as hairless monkeys go, Jeremy was the nicest primate Vilgosh had ever known. And besides, not even if your grandfather was a monkey do you deserve to be eaten by a yellow monster. Vilgosh will miss Jeremy more than the rest, for he almost managed to escape the terrible monster. But, after all, there are far worse things than sharing a room with zombies.